Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast, a show dedicated to the idea that when organizations care enough to show their people that who they are and what they do matter, they unlock the only business idea with truly unlimited potential. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. Chris Reimer has been a lot of things: an accountant, a CFO, an entrepreneur, a marketer, a social media strategist, but recently, much of his focus is championing the idea that our workplaces can be better places to spend our time. Last year, he published his first book, Happywork, to jumpstart that conversation. Chris is also out speaking about how work can be happier. Happywork is a fictional story about a consultant who's brought in to save a failing company. Along the way, he encounters some of the worst workplace situations and unhappy people you've probably ever heard of. On this episode of the podcast, Mary Rudder, Barry-Wehmiller's global messaging leader, and I begin the conversation with Chris talking about where his interest in workplace life came from and why he was motivated to write a book. But the conversation quickly turned into more of a discussion of what it means to have a happy workplace and how we can evolve our thinking to help make it happy for everyone.
Back in the day, as a, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, I had a brother who's 5 years younger, sitting around asking all those questions that kids ask all the time. Why this, why that, trying to learn about the world. Asking our parents about their jobs. And really interestingly, you remember in grade school when you'd go to school and they'd say, you'd go around and talk about what your parents did? At one point, my father was a bra salesman. That was super popular to have to mention. I got a couple of chuckles there. He ended up going into leather goods, which was a different industry, I suppose. Yeah. My mom worked for the U.S. government here in St. Louis. She worked as a civilian for the Army.
The page?
Not there, but in North St. Louis. Those were jobs that eventually went down to Huntsville, Alabama. She didn't go down there. But we gathered through intense questioning that she did not like her job very much. But my mom is an extremely strong person, she never let it be known. We had to really pry to get this information. And so, but once we tasted blood, we wanted more. So we're like, why don't you like your job? Tell us about it. And we caught glimpses or we caught whims or sniffs of, maybe some generals who just, weren't very nice or whatever. Obviously a lot of politics in a government job. And her answers were too vague for us. And so we continued to press and really couldn't get what we wanted. So then we moved on to the next why question. We asked, why don't you just leave? What we didn't understand was that, back in the day, there was, I would say, slightly less job mobility. There wasn't the internet, which allowed you to connect with anyone at any time. She did not have a college education. And there was a pension and all this waiting at the end of the proverbial rainbow. And so she just explained, this is what I do. I do this for you guys. And, your father does the same. And, we were just typical middle class, and they provided us a great upbringing. But those answers did not satisfy me either. I was always really, really good at math, and I considered this, without knowing it, I considered it an equation, and I couldn't solve it. I didn't understand why mommy had to be unhappy at work. I think that was the first, burr under my saddle, and I wanted to understand that. Moving on to my own career, and I used to be a CPA, so I spent almost 20 years working in the accounting industry, which, no offense to my accounting brethren, but it probably wasn't what I was meant to do, and it took me almost 20 years to figure it out. But, working a job that, in various industries where sometimes you had that autonomy, sometimes it seemed like the deck was stacked against you at work, I just had a lot of experiences that spoke to me. And
why'd you go into accounting?
Good at math, very interested in business. My grandfather started a company in 1949 here in St. Louis that manufactured windows. And during the 1970s, when I was probably anywhere between 5 and 15 years old, my grandmother would take me to the business, and I saw entrepreneurship in front of me, and I was just, eyes wide open watching it. And I thought to myself, being very practical, that accounting would be a really good fit to learn a lot about business. And honestly, it was true. I learned a lot about helping run businesses as a CFO. But it just, ultimately, I care more about what I do now, which is messaging and marketing and telling good stories and things like that. So, but, as I grew increasingly unhappy being an accountant, I also kind of took stock of what was happening at work and seeing being managed by people and seeing and feeling great examples of that and pretty crappy examples too. And so I started tweeting about it and blogging about it, and then eventually public speaking about it. And the very first book idea which has not happened and probably won't, was born out of the very interesting formula of people who lose their jobs and feeling really bad about it, and then having at the very same time to be on top of their game to go get the next job. I hated how far apart those were. It seemed impossible. And I felt that at one point, when I needed a new job and I couldn't help but tell my sob story to the person on the other end, and they're like, this person sounds like an HR nightmare. We don't want this person, right? And I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned all those things, and I should have taken into account what they were looking for, not how bad I was feeling. And I just remember that feeling of, I am in awful shape right now, but I have to go convince strangers on a job interview that I'm the right guy for them. They just seemed like a million miles apart. So I was going to write a book about people who've lost their jobs and the struggles they went through as they tried to sort of regain their identity and get the next job. So I was doing some interviews on that, and then ideas just started crystallizing about what's actually wrong with work. Let's dial back in time to before they lost their job and what was going on at that place, if anything. If it was a mass layoff, why did that happen? If it was an unfair firing, why did that happen? I started dialing back into the workplace itself, and I was finding that more interesting than the stories. So I started writing a nonfiction book about happiness and fulfillment in the workplace. And then I got about 65-70% of the way done and had a call with my publisher. And I had this idea for a business parable in the back of my head, inspired by Bob Berg, writer of the best business parable of all time, The Go-Giver. And I thought to myself, ooh, man, do I want to mention this to the publisher? Because if they say yes, I don't think I'm going to be a happy guy, because I just spent all this time writing this other book. And so I get on the phone with them. I said, I've got this idea. I'm thinking, maybe I should turn this into a business parable. And there was silence on the phone. And then all of a sudden he said, oh, that's really good. I was like, thanks for trying to make me feel better about this. I need just a few more days to think about this. And so, she ended up being right. I took some of the nonfiction words I had written and just weaved them into the story. So it really did make writing the story easier.
How much of you ended up in the book?
No one's ever asked me that. That's interesting. Some of it. Sam, the consultant, is a CPA. I made him out to be a really, really, really good CPA, which I was not. I was probably an average one. There are stories in the book that really did happen to me or other people. When I ran out of ideas, I just did a post on Facebook and said, tell me what's happened in your work life that's crazy. And people would say things, and I was like, real life trumps my imagination every single time. I can't believe what I just heard. I can't unhear that, and it's going in the book somehow, as I was attempting to craft a company that was just like, a fun house, like with just bizarrely warped mirrors and just like, evil clowns and the worst place that, that makes your skin crawl to even think about working at. It's a mixture of stuff that happened to me, which I've had a pretty decent work life. I mean, I'm a white guy in America. It's not that terribly tough, to be honest. But, everyone's problems are relative to them. And a lot of the experiences I had at work, there's stories in there for sure. There are some characters in the book too that, the names have obviously been changed, but that, I couldn't have come up with this stuff out of my imagination. It's not possible.
Yeah.
I imagine now that you're speaking about your book, you're hearing even worse stories. I mean, we hear that all the time. I mean, these places do exist. And everybody deserves to work at a place that they enjoy, but that does not exist out there.
Well, and you guys acquire companies where the stories exist within the walls, and then it's up to you to come in and hopefully, strike a different tone and create a different culture where people can repair themselves and feel better. It was like that, those moments where I lost a job, rather suddenly, and you just have to repair yourself emotionally to get ready to go and convince those strangers, that you're the right guy for them, to even be able to write a resume, My email address is in the back of the book, and I say if you've got any stories, share them with me, and people do share. But there was one story that it's not like pure evil, but you just can't believe what you're hearing. So I was speaking over at a college in Illinois, and afterwards a guy came up to me and said, he's like, "Boy, have I got one for you." And I was like, "I've heard a lot, try me." And he said, "So I work in an office. It's kind of a small office. We're a service company. We provide, I won't say what. Rather small office. There's, probably 10 to 15 of us, all in pretty close proximity. And the owners have Cardinals season tickets." And I said, "Cool. What happens with those tickets?" And he said, "Typically they go to the game, or the owners, or they try to provide the tickets to a local client as a gift." You know how that works. If a local one can't go, they'll start offering them to people out of town. Those people would then have to actually travel into St. Louis, sometimes a great distance, to use the tickets. He said, guess what they do with the tickets if they can't give them away to a client? Any guesses? They shred them in a shredder, a public shredder, in the small office where everyone is in close proximity, in front of the people. And I said, what came out of my mouth was, "There's no way that's true." And he said, "Buddy, it's true." And then I thought to myself, who's capable of that? That's just weird.
Yeah.
Do you guys find, let's turn the tables. I have a question for you. How often is it where you find a situation like that just makes no literal human sense whatsoever, when it comes to work? There is no ROI in doing that. What's going on upstairs, do you think?
Well, our Leadership Institute, the principals that when they're teaching, they get those stories all the time because we have invited, companies to come to Barry-Wehmiller and learn about our leadership model so that they can change culture in their own organizations. And so they'll tell stories of things that have happened. And you'd be amazed at some of the things that we've heard and as a consequence of that. And what they seem to find is that people just, sometimes it's just the way that things have been done forever, and they just don't ever change. They don't stop to change. I think it's just those people are unhappy in their work, and they don't want others to be happy in their work.
You've just taken the empathetic view of those people, which I love. Without being condescending to people, over the past few years, I've started to think about the guy behind me who's like just flipping me the bird because I'm not driving fast enough, and it's just like rage, and it's like I'm going 5 miles over the speed limit. Relax, we're all gonna get there at the same time. What's going on in that person's life is now what I kind of say to myself. And again, not to like look down or say, as they say in the South, bless your heart, No, really wondering like what is going on in that person's life. It's gotta be something. Something must be affecting them. And as a person who manages people at work, I really try to strike a balance between, executing on X, Y, and Z at work and understanding what people are going through in their personal lives, if anything. Our personal lives, the Reimer family, there's stuff going on. Welcome to the club. That's what it's like to have family. But there's people I work with who are going through more right now. And I happen to know some of those stories, and I think, oh, that's why you've got that sort of ashen, sour look on your face this morning. Now I understand. Mm-hmm. It's heartbreaking, that, and part of the reason I wrote the book is to try to encourage the world to strike a balance between work, family, friends, and personal pursuits. What seem to be the 4 main buckets of time that we spend time on. And if you can do them all well and in balance, I think you give yourself a chance of leading a happy life. There's no guarantees. You got to sometimes pick it up yourself, right? But it's when work is being shoehorned into our life instead of the other way around. When we have to bend our life to do a good job at work, I bristle at that notion.
Well, that's why work should be, that's why, leaders should look at work as a place where it's nourishing and it's a caring environment so that we can leave work, not drained, but able to go face the family and face the issues at home. And it's just the opposite in so many, instances still.
Well, in some of my in-person dealings with Bob Chapman, he has admonished me for saying, I would like to find a way to just leave work with enough gas in the tank to get home and be a good father. And he's like, no, Chris, you need to go home energized. And I'm like, Bob, no one has as much energy as you, but we're going to try, And so but no, it was really like he's said that to me, I think, on 2 occasions. I'm very careful now to answer his question, how are you doing, with, I'm doing great, Bob, But there is a matter of, how can I put this? I mean, there is a mindset to be created amongst us at work, and in hanging out with Bob a little bit, I'm sure there's a sense of realism in everything he's doing, but at the same time, there is a matter of, what is it? Is it mind over matter a little bit? What do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I see in all of my reading, I see a lot of the conversation changing. It's like we're evolving the way we think about work, and so we're trying to get people to think that, leaders to think that work should be a positive experience, that people deserve a job where they are energized and fulfilled and can be their best self. But what I also see now is that part of the equation is your personal mindset, and that as we bring about these better workplaces, it's like, okay, some people are having better workplaces, so now it's time for you to also bring it, your own self, to say, okay, I'm going to bring my best self. I'm going to be, I'm going to have a positive attitude. I'm going to draw from within and embrace everything that's been given in front of me to make it a really great overall experience.
And I think there's a couple things. I think something that you said early on, Chris, and something that Mary said just a bit ago. Chris, you were talking about your mom and how, she did it because she put up with stuff because she just had to do it. And Mary said, and she was doing it for you. And, Mary was saying earlier, said something about the way things always have been. And I think that things are changing now to where, my dad was like that too. My dad was a coal miner for a while. He was doing a job to provide for his family, and that was the way things always were. And I think just as the way things always were, to where you go to work with this mindset that I just have to get through 8 hours and then bring the paycheck home at the end of the day to put food on the table for my family. That was the way things always were for people going to work. Then also there's traditional mindsets in terms of leadership, the way things always have been, and how people interact, how the power structure works. And I think those things, the way things always have been, on both of those sides are changing. And more and more people, when people like you write a book like you've written, people like us have written a book like Bob has written, people see the possibilities to where the way things always have been don't have to be the way things are.
For certain. If I could read from my book ever so briefly.
Please.
As you dial back into what's called the Happywork Agreement, again, this sort of set of commitments that employers and employees are going to make to each other. Number 16, I will never answer a question with, because that's the way it's always been done. That's a lazy clown answer. And I used to hear that when I was an auditor for a local CPA firm. We go into organizations and, it's not just making sure the numbers are right, it's documenting business processes. And, you'd ask a question maybe I asked it in the wrong way. Like, why is it like this? And they would say, well, we just always done it that way. And I remember that like made my skin crawl a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that was back then when I didn't really know that I cared about workplace happiness and fulfillment and, increasing productivity and all that fun stuff. So I thoroughly disliked hearing that answer.
Well, if when you approach business in the manner that we do, that we're about continuous improvement. We're about always making things better. And that's what we teach through our internal university and also teach through our Leadership Institute. Then that can't be the answer. That's the way it's always been done, because you always have to try and improve it. You're always saying, okay, how can I make this better? How can we evolve? Therefore you can't even subscribe to, it's the way it's been done, and so that's the way we do it, because you always have to say, well, it doesn't matter, got to do it better. So.
Right. And earlier you were talking about family. This was one of the 46 commitments that I think I was most proud of, where it says, Venori, that's the name of the fictitious company, Venori Inc. cannot always operate in a family-first manner, but we're going to try as hard as we can. The world is different now. Dads work in concert with moms to take care of their kids. Not everyone has a robust support network they can rely on. A sick child at home is a problem that a family needs to tend to. I, meaning the employer, will be as flexible as possible. An employee's family is going to be more important to them than our organization is, and I will work hard to remember that. We are not going to go out of business because an employee had to leave work to comfort a puking child. We should be stronger than that. So I enjoyed putting examples at the end, because otherwise it's like, okay, more business platitudes. But then if you can think back to that time when your kid was sick and you're calling your spouse, you're like, okay, who will get in less trouble, for leaving to go handle this? We're not gonna move forward as a species while this is happening. I mean, again, we are literally raising the next group of human beings that are going to be running the world. I think I can care more about them than my place of work and still get a great job done at work, still not offend my boss at work, and lead a whole life, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I remember when we met when you and Bob had a speaking engagement together, one of the things that you said to me that Bob had said, and you said, I say that all the time, was the line, everybody is someone's precious child. And, that's working with what you just said, and then also the empathetic part that we were talking about earlier, the empathetic part of even thinking about what's happening in the worst person's life, or the person who acts the worst, their life, when they come into their door, because they're also somebody's precious child. What has happened with them to make them think that way, or to be that way they are at that particular point in that day?
I had a weirdly spiritual experience recently looking at a pile of resumes. Not literally a pile because we're electronic now, but looking at 50-ish resumes and cover letters for a position that we're attempting to hire at Maryville, and looking at them all and immediately having thoughts to my two daughters, thinking, because we're looking at these and some of them they're really overqualified. Some of them, they have none of the relevant experience that we required. And then I just started thinking from this empathetic viewpoint, like, why am I receiving this resume? What's going on in their life? I'm looking, do they currently have a job? We're able to see, because they're required to put in their salaries, and you can see 6 jobs in a row, each with decreasing salary, just stuff like that happening. And thinking to myself, one of these days my daughter will be creating a resume for public ridicule, basically. And thinking to myself, I'm hoping that she can have it in her heart to go out and create a life worth putting on a resume, finding those personal pursuits, those volunteer opportunities, writing her own book or creating her own podcast someday. Will she lead a life that allows her to quickly and cleanly talk to a stranger and say, I'm the right person for you? I just kept thinking about them as I was looking through these resumes and seeing awkward writing and typos and just inappropriate experience, and just feeling bad knowing that out of those 50 people, like, one might get the job, or we might go back to the drawing board and keep looking for more. I don't know, just thinking a lot about what what it's like to, because people really internalize their jobs. It's why I think it hurts so much when they lose it. It's not just a matter of, oh, nuts, like I'm not Rockefeller, so I'm going to have to go find a job. Like I need money. It's really more like you took something from me. You know, you've stolen my identity.
What did I do wrong? You know, what did I do wrong? Even if it has nothing to do with something that you've done.
Yeah.
You know, that, because, you know, you don't, like if you find somebody who just doesn't like you, and you can't deal with that, you know, like this guy does not like me. How do I make it? Because you don't want anybody to not like you, you know, and that's the same thing with a job too. It's like, you know, for some reason that's why, you know, we talk often about how layoffs are so demoralizing. You know, there's people, really there may be no answer why they're not there anymore, other than maybe it's we mismanaged things to where we have to make these cuts. It's not a personal thing, but that feeling, that effect is so demoralizing because you've been divorced from this thing that means so much to you in a sense, and you keep thinking, what is it that I did? What did I do? Or what could I have done?
And
Go ahead.
companies dehumanize that process, and that's what we're basically saying. And there needs to be more humanization of the workplace again, so that, you know, it's happy work is achieved when, you know, work is looked at as a relationship between people, not an outcome that to be achieved, but to what we can do together as people. And I think that's, you know, what's missing in a lot of workplaces today.
And people aren't functions, and people aren't looked at as functions to where that, and because that's a whole other dehumanizing aspect of it. You know, if you're a secretary, if you're a mechanic, that defines you, and that's what you are something. You are not somebody. I
embrace the complexities of work and life in general. I talk about it in the book a little bit. Most things in life are not black and white. It's a really deep pool of grays, and we're always swimming in that pool, right? But I mean, I have been escorted out of a building on my last day before. I'm not a troubling guy, really, but the complexity is that there are people like that. They lose their job and they go and they throw everything they can on a flash drive and then they get out of there. Or they jump on the computer and they sabotage it. Or they break something. Or they hurt somebody. These things really do happen, you know, and it's really unfortunate, and we don't need to explain why those things happen. They just do. And so I understand that I'm going to be watched on my last day as I'm being laid off or whatever. But aren't there ways to do it in a more human way? Bob's reminder of, you know, everyone is someone's special child, or however he phrases it, you know, again, if you can remind yourself of that and take it to heart, you can, you know, if you have children, then it's even easier to you know, come to this perspective. You would never want some stranger mistreating your son or daughter, so why the hell would you do it to someone at work? Again, if you are doing that because you feel like there's, you know, a square peg to be, you know, hammered into a round hole to solve an equation and make more money, again, it's super short-term gain, but it's just weak. You know, it's just the harder work is embracing people for who they are, embracing their entire humanity, understanding and not taking offense to the fact that someone might care more about their family than they do about your business. Just embracing the complexity that both can be cared about at the same time, and it's not a contest. If you can't tell, I've worked for someone like that before, where it was like, we used to get asked that too when I used to work at Falk Harrison, a local design and marketing firm. You know, we would have potential clients say, you know, are you going to love our business as much as I do? You know what that person wanted to hear, but the real answer is, no, stupid. It's your business. Of course you're going to care about it more. We're going to care about it a lot. But like, only you could love this business as much as you love it, you know? And so only I can love my family as much as I do. But if you have a leader like Bob, for instance, who shows as much care as he does for his people, the real point that people need to understand is there is a dollar for dollar ROI in doing that. So in your coldest of hearts, if you can't embrace the idea, just realize there's money involved too.
It's a great business
and it's
decision,
like a
yes.
great step one. And then by the time you've done that and you've changed the people around you, and maybe you hear a couple stories and you start breaking through that hard shell, you know. But listeners, if you do work in an organization where the leader doesn't have the heart of a, say, Bob Chapman, honestly, find a way to explain that there is a business return on investment to caring about your people.
More engaged employees are more creative. They're more innovative. I mean, all the research, you know, that you can see right now shows that the ROI is really incredible.
ROI, though, tells me that we're going to be looking at a spreadsheet at some point. Now, I used to be a CPA, so spreadsheets make me cringe now. I get the shakes, right? So, wonderful. Some calculations are easy to do. Some are more difficult to do. You can obviously look at your turnover. Let's say it's gone down. What does it cost to hire a new employee? Average of $10,000, easy. So you can use that right there. Or you can just dial it back, and I love to keep things simple. Does anyone think that better work is done by disgruntled, unhappy employees? Does anyone have an argument for that? Mm-hmm. I think there was one peer-reviewed study that said that, and I was like, what were those people smoking during that peer review? That's crazy. That's just not so, and everyone can embrace that idea. Happier employees will do better work. Don't need to prove it, because the reverse cannot be true.
Yeah. You can find out more about Chris and Happywork on the web at chrisreimer.com. That's CHRISREIMER.com. And you can also find Chris on Twitter at Chris Reimer. If you'd like to find out more about Bob Chapman and Rod Sizodia's book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. For updates on the book, this podcast, and to get a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening, and don't forget, Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited potential.